Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This week is going to be a dedicated listener mailbag episode. We do have enough content for a standalone show. I received a number of messages over the past few weeks, which is great. We're also going to get into the tactics versus imbalances debate. I'll explain more about that a little bit later in the show. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you. I want to thank all of you for your support of the podcast, for listening on a regular basis, and for all the kind words. I really appreciate everything, all the shout outs on social media, telling your chess playing friends about the show and word of mouth, all the 5-star reviews. It really means a lot. I also want to thank those of you who supported the podcast on our Buy Me a Coffee page. It's been very active this past month, and I'm very appreciative. For those who are not aware, Buy Me a Coffee is our support page. If you want to support the show financially, you can buy me a virtual coffee. You could buy one coffee or more. There's a link in the show notes, and it's basically a way of saying thank you. Everything I get from that show pretty much does go back into production costs. So you really are literally, supporting the show when you do that. So we appreciate it. And again, if you're not able or interested in supporting the show financially, there are plenty of other things you can do that won't cost you a penny, such as leaving a 5-star review or simply spreading the words about the podcast. Those are very valuable. However you choose to give back, it's a big help. And again, I want to thank you all for doing that. So we have a lot of great comments this week. Again, this is a dedicated listener mailbag episode, a mailbag exclusive, if you will. So let's jump right in.
You've got mail.
Our first message is from Philip, who bought us 2 coffees on our Buy Me a Coffee page. We appreciate it, Philip. And he says, "Hi, Neil. Following up on a previous episode, I recently encountered a misset clock for the first time in my life. In the European tournaments I play in, clocks are set by the arbiters. The tournament this happened at was actually pretty nice. Every board had wooden pieces and a DGT 3000 clock. The time control was 90 minutes for 40 moves, plus 15 minutes for the rest of the game, with 30 seconds increment every move, meaning players have to notate every single move no matter what. There were 1 or 2 FIDE certified national arbiters, but the vast majority of the arbiter team was very experienced. They talked about some of them handling the World Rapid and Blitz Championships or being an arbiter for Magnus Carlsen. So it was very surprising when the clock felt weird after move 40. I had more time, so I didn't care much, but my opponent quickly blitzed out move 46 with 7 seconds on the clock, and the clock still showed 7 seconds, which should be impossible. The arbiter was befuddled and went to replace the clock, but the position was drawn anyway, so he just agreed to a draw. I also have a topic idea, the recent resurgence of Chess 960 or freestyle chess. Suddenly, there are multiple courses on Chess 960. Many of my friends are playing it, and online chess streams regularly add in Chess 960 arenas. One of my next tournaments even has Chess 960 sections with Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana playing in an open tournament. Do you see that at your club as well? I hope you learn from your next game, no matter what the result. Best from Dusseldorf, Germany. And sorry for the long email. I'll make it up with 2 coffees. Listeners, support this excellent podcast, Philip. Well, Philip, thanks so much. No need to apologize for the long email. I do appreciate the coffees. And working backwards, you mentioned the resurgence of Chess 960 as a topic idea. As I mentioned last week, and I think everybody kind of understands my deal on this now, I'm really not into it. I'm just going to be honest. I'm not a Chess 960 guy. I'm not a Bug House guy. I don't like any of the variants. Maybe I'm in the minority about that. I actually find all of those very annoying. That's just me. And if people disagree, it's all love. But I'm just not into that. I'm more of a traditionalist. I just like the standard game of chess. So I don't really see that happening on the show. That could change. Maybe I could get someone on here who's more versed in that than I am, who can talk about it. I'm not sure. But right now, I don't see that being in the cards. Now, as far as the misset clock, now you said you encountered a misset clock for the first time. Well, good for you. That's pretty good. Most of us have dealt with it more than once. Now, you said the arbiters are supposed to do it. I mean, I've heard mixed things about the competence of arbiters out there. Some are much more competent than others. But again, that's just anecdotal evidence. That's just things I've heard, stories and anecdotes. So I really can't speak to that. I'm more of a U.S. chess guy rather than FIDE. But even many of the directors here at U.S. Chess, they've made some interesting rulings or they've made mistakes about things, even simple things like touch moves. So they're out there. It happens, but I'm glad it worked out with your game. Like you said, it turned out to be a draw. And you mentioned in your tournament, you had the wooden pieces with the DGT clocks. Really, really nice. I appreciate you sharing that, Philip. And thanks again for the coffees. I appreciate it. Next, we have a comment from Stefane. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He bought us 3 coffees. We really appreciate it. And he says, thinking we all need that second or third coffee on busy days. Love your podcast. Very relatable and great information. Thanks. Well, thanks, Stefan. I appreciate that. And thanks so much for supporting the show. It really means a lot. Our next message is from Larry, who bought us a coffee as well. And he says, Neil, I really enjoy the pod. You provide a unique perspective, especially as a TD. Episode 140 was especially good. I had 2 things I wanted to point out. 1, what your opponent did in annotating your blunder during your game was not only annoying and disrespectful, but illegal. FIDE rules prohibit annotation during the game. Not only that, the notation must be algebraic, no pawn to king 4, pawn to queen 4 for an old timer like me. The second point is that one should carefully check the rules before playing correspondence or daily chess. Specifically, chess.com, Lichess, and USCF prohibit computer assistance in their events. Thank you again for the pod and all you do. It truly sounds like a labor of love. Larry from Maryland. And he says, P.S., unless it was the parent of a young kid, I wouldn't want anyone camped out at my table. Maybe that's just me. So what he was referring to there, I was saying that at our club, one of the new things I'm seeing is that somebody will bring a guest, like a girlfriend or a boyfriend, wife, something like that, and they actually sit at the board as a guest. Usually you sit off to the side. And I try not to, micromanage. If it doesn't seem to be bothering anybody, I don't say anything. If somebody said something, I would ask that person politely to kind of give some space and sit a certain distance from the table. But I agree with you, Larry. I wouldn't want anyone camped out at my table as well. If it were me, I would probably say something. Now, it's funny, you mentioned about note-taking being illegal. You're absolutely right. You mentioned FIDE, but it's true for U.S. chess as well. Larry's referring to a podcast a few weeks ago or a week ago, I forget which one it was, where I had blundered an exchange in a game and my opponent wrote 2 question marks on the score sheet. And clearly I could see it. I thought it was a bit cheesy and gratuitous. And I was so focused on sort of the shock value of that. In other words, I thought it was so cheesy that I forgot to mention in the podcast that, oh yeah, by the way, that's actually illegal. I would not have said that to my opponent. I wouldn't have said, hey, that's illegal. You can't do that, because that would have showed him that I saw it, that I was aware of it, and that it was getting in my head, and I didn't want to give him that psychological edge. I said something after the game, of course. I didn't say something during the game because I didn't want it to show that it bothered me or that it was affecting me. I mean, what actually happened was it motivated me to win the game, which I did. But Larry, you're absolutely right. Not only was it disrespectful, but it actually is illegal to do that. Again, you can only write the moves themselves and the timestamp. That's it. Anything else is not allowed. And then your comment about different rules for correspondence and daily chess. Absolutely. You kind of need a spreadsheet to keep track of that. Some correspondence chess, you're allowed to use computers. Others, you're not allowed. Others, you can only use databases, but not engines. I mean, again, the thing with correspondence chess, I mean, let's keep it real. Even if those are the rules, even if they say no computers, I mean, I don't really know how you would police that. And I'm sure even the most scrupulous person would be sorely tempted to check a computer for a correspondence game. I guess it's an honor system thing. But what I'm thinking about doing is having a guest, I already know who I'm going to ask, to come on the podcast to discuss correspondence chess, because there does seem to be some interest in that. I think it's a great thing if you do correspondence chess in addition to your over-the-board games. I think those complement each other very well. But thanks again, Larry, for the coffee and your email. I appreciate it. Next message is from Olivier, who bought us 3 coffees. Thanks so much. He says, "Hi, Neil. I stumbled upon your podcast about a year ago while searching for something different from the usual chess video overload. I thought, why not give this podcast a try? And I'm glad I did. I've become a big fan of the chess angle. I've gained some really valuable insights that are definitely helping my game. I especially appreciate how you explore the psychological side of chess, particularly over the board play. That was a bit of a blind spot for me before. Your podcast has really opened my eyes to how important it is. I recently picked up The Amateur's Mind, and I'm loving it. It's definitely living up to the hype. Neil, you've created something really special with the chess angle. You have a real knack for explaining ideas and sharing helpful tips. Keep up the fantastic work." Well, thanks, Olivia. That's incredibly kind. You really made my week with that. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast. I'm glad you're finding it helpful. Those are incredibly kind words. So thank you so much. And he continues, "Like many people, I'm short on study time. I was interested in your recent discussion on correspondence chess. I usually play with a 3-day time scale, which gives me the flexibility to skip a day if life gets in the way. It's a great alternative for me since I rarely have a spare 10 or 15 minutes for a quick game without interruptions. This way I can have multiple games going and stay engaged with chess almost every day. I also feel like correspondence chess is closer to an over-the-board game, like 90 minutes plus 30 seconds, because it allows for the same kind of in-depth analysis. Does that make sense to you? Finally, some exciting news. My club, Karpov Dynza, is celebrating its 50th anniversary, and even better, the club managed to book Belgian GM Daniel Darda for a world record clock simul on Monday, June 9th, 2025. Olivier from Dynza in Belgium. I hope I'm pronouncing the city correct. Thanks so much, Olivier, for the coffees and the email. Very interesting. So another inquiry about correspondence chess. So I'm very, very likely, again, going to do a dedicated episode just on correspondence chess tips. That's definitely going to be a guest episode because I don't know too much about it. Somehow, despite playing for many years, I never got into it. I'm glad you're enjoying The Amateur's Mind. It really is a great book. You're going to enjoy that. It's going to help a lot. And yes, chess psychology is huge. It's a major part of the game. In some ways, that's even more important than chess theory, your attitude, your mindset. It plays such a large role. That's why many people study a lot and know a lot of theory and all these openings and things like that, but they can never get the psychological side squared away, which is why they have trouble improving very often. So you make a good point there. So thanks so much again, Olivier, for your email. Our next message is from Greg, who bought us 3 coffees. Thanks so much. He says, "Hi, Neil. I know there are a lot of comments about the merits of over the board versus online, and there is, of course, room for both. I'm just passing on my story in case it is of interest, especially to your older improvers. I am a 73-year-old improver with an English Chess Federation rating of just under 1600. I started playing at about the age of 10 and progressed well in my club and county up to about age 20. I met my wife, started a family, focused on my career, and stopped playing club chess only for the occasional family social chess. I keep my hand in, quote unquote, teaching my daughters chess. I also volunteered to coach at their school chess clubs. I did some limited correspondence chess, but with the advent of chess.com, I then started playing online. This then becomes the point I want to pass on. For my job, I was having a conversation with a dementia specialist. I was then 70. He asked me what I was doing to counter dementia as I moved to semi-retirement. I told him a day hardly went by without me having a handful of online games. He was interested and asked me if I interacted with my opponents. I told him that with blitz timings online, that was not practical. He then said, look, carry on doing that. It is almost certainly doing your chest muscle good, but it is not helping stave off dementia. You need to have human interaction into older age to combat dementia. So I joined a club and started playing. I was okay enough to get an initial provisional rating of 1300 and played on the lower board for the club teams in the lower leagues. The dementia specialist was right. That human face-to-face interaction really does help. I improved to around 1600 over the board and have a renewed ambition to take this as far as I can. I hope this inspires any of your older listeners thinking about joining their local club. Do it. You won't regret it. The social interaction is as important as chess. Regards, Greg from the UK. Thanks so much, Greg. That story is incredibly inspiring. I really appreciate you sharing it. I'm glad it's going well for you. And yes, many studies have shown that activities such as chess or anything that requires mental effort can stave off dementia and things like that. It's excellent for your mental health as we get older. So it's very important to stay involved. So that's a fantastic story. I really appreciate it, Greg, and thanks so much for sharing it with us. Our next message is from Bob, who is a senior tournament director, a retired one, and he had a few notes on topics from episode number 140. First, he says 0.00 engine position, or the range minus 0.09 to 0.09, if you'd like, is balanced, not necessarily drawn. There are many more factors before we can call it drawn or even drawish. Okay, I'm going to take these one at a time. What he's referring to, I was saying that if the engine shows you're only up by a very small amount of pawn units, like if it says you're up by like 0.53 pawn units, something like that, a lot of people think that's a huge advantage. And I said something like that's a drawn position. What I meant, Bob, was that you really can't say that one side is winning. So when you say it's balanced, that's true. I think we're getting a little literal and into semantics and splitting hairs here. So when I said it's drawn, I simply meant that you can't say that one side has a huge advantage if it's an advantage that's less than like one pawn unit, that type of thing. I use the word that it's drawish, but you're using the word balanced. Technically, you're probably more correct. But again, I was simply pointing out that if the computer says you're better by like 0.63, that's not winning. You want to call it balanced, you want to call it drawish. I was simply saying that it's not as big an advantage as some people make it out to be when it's two humans. Next thing, Bob says correspondence rules vary. International ICCF play allows engines. An American recently won the world championship and had a great article on the process. I think of it as centaur chess, and U.S. chess correspondence rules allow computer databases, but not engines. Well, I appreciate that clarification, Bob. And as I mentioned in the earlier email, it definitely varies. So if you're going to play correspondence chess, depending on which organization you're playing with, you really got to check the rules as far as engines, as far as databases, because it's definitely not universal. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Bob. And then he says, lastly, and this is an opinion, I completely disagree on adding total time on an erroneously set clock when the increment or delay is correctly put on the game. True that rules give the tournament director discretion on time settings, so it probably works out since the players feel good about getting some time back. That's a ton more clicks and ways to mess up the clock further. For me, that's a tough cookie situation for the players who didn't check their settings before the game. Sincerely, Bob, Senior TD retired. Bob, I appreciate the comment. Yeah, we're going to have to call it a draw on this one because I do stand by my ruling there. But again, there is TD discretion. So the way that I rule or the way that you rule or the way another TD rules on the same situation might be different. Now, you said you disagree on adding total time on an erroneously set clock when the increment or delay is correctly put on the game. In the game that I explained, the delay was not correctly put on there. So just to recap for those of you who need some context, I had mentioned that there was a game at my club where my opponent swore up and down that the delay was on there. He said it was embedded in the time because I wasn't seeing a separate countdown. And I thought it wasn't on there. He assured me he's a regular. And then as we played further, I could finally tell that it wasn't on there. I mean, I probably should have known, but I didn't want to argue. He swore it was on there. Once we both agreed that he forgot to put the delay on, I gave us each a few more minutes of time and then added the delay for the rest of the game. Now, I stand by that because not having the delay for that period of time, each of us lost time. So I only gave us a few minutes each. I think that was the correct call. Now, you say messing up the clock further. I don't think so. It really wasn't a big deal. I wrote down, see what I do when I adjust a clock, and this just comes from experience. The first thing I do is I write down the current time. So this way you don't start adjusting the clock and wait, well, how much time did you have? So if there's a clock issue, the first thing I do before I do anything is I write down the current time for each player. So now I have it. So if we start messing with the clock, we know what it is. And then I simply adjust accordingly. Now, it really depends on the situation. It depends on how far into the game we are. Did the game just start a minute ago? Are we an hour into it? I think in some situations, it's correct to not give the players any extra time. In some cases, it is correct. But in the case I mentioned, the delay was supposed to be on there. He said it was, and it wasn't. So I thought adding a few more minutes was correct, not an excessive amount. Other TDs like yourself feel that you should just sort of leave it where it is and just add the delay from that time on. But again, in your email, you said when the increment or delay is correctly put on there, it wasn't on there at all. So slightly different situation. Either way, Bob, there's always going to be some disagreement between TDs on how things should be handled, but I certainly respect and appreciate your point of view. And I appreciate you chiming in about the engine and the correspondence chess as well. So thanks so much. We're now going to take a short break and we will continue with our listener mailbag exclusive episode. Stick around. Welcome back. And this week we have a call. So take it away.
Hey guys, this is Acacia. I left you guys a comment a while back, and I'm just following up to see if you guys were interested in the whole daddy-daughter chess tournament idea. You know, me and my father have been playing chess together since I was 5. Him and his father, same way. And so we were looking to see what your opinions were about a dad-daughter, father-daughter chess tournament to get more representation from families involved in chess. And so if you could get back to us, and we've been listening to every single one of your episodes, and my dad's a huge fan. He spends about 6 hours a day as a chess improver, and I've watched his ELO nearly double in a year's time, which should not necessarily be possible at over 60 years old. So thank you. Have a great day.
Well, Acacia, thanks so much for your voicemail. The fact that chess plays such a big role in your family, I think is fantastic. Your dad did it with his father, and now you're playing chess with your father. I think that's great. My daughter's not really into it. I had tried to teach her the game, but she went on her own path, which is fine. She's really into basketball and music, and that's great as long as she has something that she's interested in and devoted to. So she's kind of on her own path. So a father-daughter tournament wouldn't apply for myself, but I'm sure many of our listeners might be into that. I'm sure we have a lot of dads listening, and maybe they play chess with their daughters. It's a family activity. So I'm not sure if this would be an online type of thing or if you're looking for an in-person meetup. I guess you'll work out the logistics based on the type of responses you get. But what I will do, I want to mention this before I forget, I will put the contact information for Acacia and her dad in the show notes in case you want to reach out if that's something you're interested in. Now, what you said about your father improving and that his ELO nearly doubled, that's fantastic. it's absolutely possible for those over 60. I think the idea that we can't improve as we get older is a bit overblown. I think the reason is it kind of gets overshadowed by a lot of these young kids who are developing very rapidly, but you absolutely can improve as you get older. The fact that your dad's getting so much better, I think that's fantastic. I really appreciate the kind words about the podcast, the fact that you both listen to it and that your dad's a big fan as well. Really means a lot, Acacia. I appreciate that. So again, I'll put Acacia's contact info if you want to reach out regarding a father-daughter tournament or a meetup, however that's going to work out. I think it's a fantastic idea. And thanks again for your voicemail. I really, really appreciate it. So good luck with everything. Our final message is a comment from YouTube from @NickFanzo regarding tactics versus Jeremy Silman's method of imbalances, which can be a polarizing topic. While many people believe in Silman's method and it's helped them, there has been some criticism. So let's talk about that. So @NickFanzo writes, chess is about tactics and moves, not analyzing imbalances. No one thinks that way, and to force yourself to is difficult. Finding candidate moves and calculating variables while recognizing patterns through memory is key. Check out Willie Hendricks' book, Move First, Think Later, which shows you the issue with analyzing imbalances. It works well in a book, but not in real-life situations, especially with time restraints. For example, you're just starting the middle game and you see multiple imbalances, piece activity knights versus bishops, etc. Which imbalance should you focus on if you see multiple imbalances? None of Silman's books explain how to prioritize which imbalance is more apparent if you see more than one at the same time. This is difficult for someone to pick up and analyze this way. Finding moves and tactics is much faster and easier. Well, thank you @NickFanzo for your comment. I do disagree with much of what you said, but I want to be fair. Now, before I address that directly, I did record, I should say, 2 previous episodes on Silman's imbalances, and they're episodes 83 and 84 of this podcast. I will link those up in the show notes so nobody has to go digging for them. These were the first 2 episodes of season 6, and I recorded these shortly after Jeremy Silman sadly passed away. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Now, episode 83 was titled Mastering the Middle Game for Club Players, The Legacy of IM Jeremy Silman, where I spoke about his methodology of imbalances and why I feel it's helpful. I got into that in detail. But to be fair, in episode 84, the very next one, which is Mastering the Middle Game Part 2, I titled it, Are There Flaws with Silman's Imbalances? And there, I actually nitpicked some of Silman's philosophy. As much as I like him, as important as his philosophy is, as much as it completely transformed my game, and as much as I advocate for it, you know that I recommend The Amateur's Mind as essential reading, there are some issues with Silman. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those now. In the episode 84, I get into that in detail, but I'll rehash a few of them here. Because as much of a fan of Silman as I am, as essential as he is, there are some aspects of his thinking where I kind of roll my eyes a little bit, if I'm being honest. Now, before we get into this, let's explain what Silman's imbalances are. I'm guessing most of you have heard of this, but some of you might be listening and they're like, what is he talking about? So Jeremy Silman has a method of analyzing and understanding a position, and he calls it the imbalances. The imbalances are basically the differences in the position. And his whole thing is, if you understand what the imbalances are, you'll know the proper course of action and will then hopefully find the correct move. But his whole thing is you shouldn't look for candidate moves until you understand what the imbalances are in the position. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to read quickly from page 2 of The Amateur's Mind, where Silman defines what the imbalances are. So these, again, are the differences in the position and things to look for so that you understand what's happening, because his whole thing is you have to make a move based on what the position calls for and not necessarily what you feel like doing. You might feel like attacking, but the position doesn't call for that. You might feel like playing an aggressive move, but the position doesn't call for that. You might feel like slowing things down and playing like a waiting move or something more positional. But again, the position may not call for that. So here's the list of his imbalances. Again, I'm reading verbatim from page 2 of The Amateur's Mind. The first imbalance is minor pieces, the interplay between bishops and knights, trying to make one superior to the other. The next one is pawn structure, a broad subject that encompasses doubled pawns, isolated pawns, backward pawns, passed pawns, etc. The next one is space, the annexation of territory on a chessboard. After that is material, owning pieces of greater value than the opponent's. Next is files and squares. Files, ranks, and diagonals act as pathways for your pieces, while squares act as homes. Whole plans can center around the domination of a file or the creation of a weak square in the enemy camp. Next is development. A lead in development gives you more force in a specific area of the board. This is a temporary imbalance because the opponent will eventually catch up. And finally, the last one is initiative, dictating the tempo of a game. This is also a temporary imbalance. So to review, minor pieces, pawn structure, space, material, files and squares, development, and initiative. So those are the imbalances. Now, yes, there is a school of thought that Silman's system is flawed or really impractical. As you say, now move first, think later by Willie Hendricks. Yes, in that book, he does criticize Silman's system. Now, I'm going to be honest, just my opinion. I didn't like that book. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was very piecemeal. I thought it was very throw together. It's kind of just a bunch of loosely unrelated articles about chess where he kind of shares his thoughts. I know some people like that book. I wasn't crazy about it. I ended up buying it because I heard a few things about it. There was a little bit of buzz. I ended up giving it away because I was too lazy to return it. Now, the one thing where I do agree with Hendricks is that Silman is sometimes too dismissive of alternate moves that are just as good. In other words, he's saying, well, if you understand the position, this is the move you should play. And he's dismissive of other moves that maybe aren't as good, but are perfectly acceptable. So I agree with Hendricks on that one point. The rest of it, not so much. And I also believe that Silman doesn't emphasize checking for tactics and threats nearly enough. In other words, before you think about imbalances and reading the position, you have to look for threats first. Like your opponent just moved. Is he threatening something? Is there a tactic? You have to look for those immediate ideas first. Then you can think in terms of the imbalances. Now, Silman says that, but again, I don't think he emphasizes that nearly enough. As I said earlier, he's also dismissive of alternate moves that are good enough, and those quote-unquote good enough moves are often enough to win games at this level. And no, you don't need to think like in terms of this, like, hardcore imbalances on every move. Like every move doesn't have to be some intricate plan. There are many times where your opponent makes a move, he's attacking one of your pieces, you simply move it to safety. Or he makes a move that threatens mate in one, and you have to defend against that. I mean, you don't really have to think of imbalances necessarily on that one particular move, right? Not, some responses are a little bit more immediate. So you got to check the tactics and threats first, but check out episode, again, 84, where I discuss these flaws, or I really nitpick. Nitpick is a better word. I discuss these nitpicks in Silman's system. So you can check that out. However, here's the thing. While there is some criticism of his system of imbalances, I do believe it's not a perfect system. It has completely overhauled my game. It supercharged my chess. And to this day, it has helped me. Yeah, there are some minor issues with it, as I mentioned, but I do believe the good outweighs the bad and that this is an essential system for amateur tournament players. The Amateur's Mind is an absolute must. Now, you made a comment that he doesn't address what to do if there's more than one imbalance. He actually does. Silman has a chapter, a dedicated chapter in The Amateur's Mind entitled Many Imbalances, One Board, where he addresses a situation on prioritizing if there's more than one imbalance. And that's a big part of chess. Very often, there's more than one viable idea. Which one do we choose? And that can be a challenging part of the game, but he addresses that. Now, the idea of tactics beating out the imbalances. For example, you say chess is about tactics and moves, not analyzing imbalances. Now, the idea of playing tactically, and this is out there like that, the imbalances and all this positional stuff. Well, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, tactics is always going to win out. That's true. That's true a lot, but not always. And that's only going to get you so far. The idea that, well, I'm just going to win it with tactics and just with cheapies, that's going to win you some games. That's true. But it's going to get to a point where that's just not going to work out. And what about the, 80% of positions where no immediate tactics exist? Like, what do you do then? And then you also say in your comment that finding candidate moves and calculating variables while recognizing patterns through memory is key. But how do you know which candidate moves to find unless you know what's happening in the position? And that's what Silman's whole thing is. You need to understand the position first and then look at candidate moves that fit the correct line of play. And of course, that comes after checking for tactics and immediate threats first. Now, I want to also make a comment. This is kind of a personal opinion on Silman's imbalances. I think a lot of people misinterpret it. There's sort of some misnomers, if you will, or misperceptions is probably the better word. There's some misperceptions on what his imbalances mean. A lot of people think that Silman's imbalances just means like slow positional play, right? Oh, Silman and the imbalances, it's all about, these positional ideas like controlling a square. That's part of it, but his system does include tactics as well, because he makes clear that if you have a dynamic imbalance, meaning you have to play quickly because it's going to go away. Like a lead in development is going to go away because your opponent's going to catch up eventually, so you got to jump on it. So if you have a dynamic imbalance, you have to play aggressively or you're going to lose the advantage. I mean, the classic example is if you have a lead in development and your opponent's not castled, you want to rip open the center and go to his king before he castles and develops, because if you just sort of play slowly and play regular chess, eventually he's going to castle and develop and catch up, and you're going to lose that dynamic initiative. So Silman's imbalances, depending on what it is, does call for tactical play. All right, so the idea that it's just sort of like slow maneuvering and positional stuff, that's not necessarily true. It really depends on the position. Part of his imbalances involve slower positional ideas, but again, the dynamic imbalances involve, quote unquote, quicker moves and tactical ideas and even sacrificing material. That's how I would respond to your comment. You need both tactical and positional skills to excel at chess. And the best players, whether it's the best amateurs or even the top GMs, they excel at both. Now, yeah, they might be better at one than the other. They might be a stronger positional player than tactical or a stronger tactical player than positional. But they can do both, and they know when to do both, because there are many positions where just trying to play tactically is not going to work. But you definitely need both. And Silman has described his own style as being positional, but with a tactical overlay. So he is more of a positional kind of safety first player, but that's sort of covered with a blanket of tactics, because if he sees a tactical shot, he's certainly going to play it. And also, when you play according to the imbalances and do what the position calls for, that will often lead to a tactical shot if your opponent misplays. Because remember, many tactics come about from having a positional advantage. Yes, they'll come about from blunders as well. That's absolutely true. Now, what I'm going to do also, I'm making a little bit of a tangent here. There is a video I'm going to share. It's on YouTube. It's of Jeremy Silman giving a lesson on the imbalances, and it's quite good in case you want to check it out, because I know we know Silman for his books and his courses, but to my understanding, there's not too many actual videos of him out there. But this one was sent to me recently. I'm going to, I forgot who sent it to me. I feel terrible right now that I forgot. I'll try to remember. Anyway, one of you kindly sent me the link for this. It's called Mastering Chess Imbalances. I'm going to link it up in the show notes. You may want to check it out, but it's quite good. So I would wrap up the Silman debate, the tactics debate, by saying this. Before you get into the imbalances and quote unquote, understanding the position and the ideas, the very first thing you must do is look for immediate threats. So your opponent just moved. Is there a tactical threat? Is there a mate? You have to take care of that first. Once you take care of that, assuming that doesn't exist, then you go into Silman's system, look at the imbalances, look at what the plans are for both sides, and you go on from there. All right, but you absolutely have to check for threats first. And as I said, there are some nitpicks with his system. I mentioned those a few moments ago. I also talk about them in episode 84. But the bottom line is this: Silman's philosophy and his method of imbalances is invaluable. I recommend it to everybody. Now, it does take some time to really absorb it and use it effectively in your games. It's not like you're going to read the amateur's mind or reassess your chess and overnight your rating is going to go up 300 points. It's going to take some time to internalize that into your own playing. It's going to take a lot of trial and error, which is why you can't just study. You have to play as well. Understanding his system is one thing, but implementing it is another. So that will do it for this week. Everything that I've referenced and referred to, I will link up in the show notes so it's all there. Most of you are probably listening while you're in the car or doing something else. No worries, no need to write anything down. Everything will be linked up for you so you don't have to go digging. As always, I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.